record is State of Tennessee versus Billy Turner. Docket number 1705881. Mr. Turner is present. Mr. John Keith Perry, Mr. Andre Thomas are present for Mr. Turner. Mr. Paul Hagerman and Mr. Austin Schofield are present for the state. Are both sides ready to proceed?
Yes, ready.
Do we have all 6 deputies in the courtroom right now? Deputy Smith.
Yes, sir. We got Deputy Hollister. She's outside.
Tell him not to stray. Deputy Smith.
Stay close.
May bring in the jury, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. What is it doing? Good morning. Is this where they were all seated yesterday, Deputy Smith? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone can have a seat. How's everyone doing? Okay, here's your first test for today. What's the last thing I told you yesterday? Bingo, somebody got an A. Now, did anyone watch, hear, listen, read anything about this case overnight that the media did cover?
No.
Thank y'all, because I've promised I've had people, I've told that before, and they come back the next day and say, just coffee, I couldn't help myself, and I did it anyway. If you can all stand, please raise your right hand. I need to administer different oaths before we can get started this morning. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will well and truly try the issues of traverse joined herein between the state of Tennessee and the defendant Billy Turner, a true deliverance make and a true verdict render according to the law and the evidence, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. May be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, you're taking an oath that you will render a true verdict on this case based only on the law and the evidence. I've introduced some of the deputies to you that will be with you through the course of this week. And Deputy Smith is standing to my right. Deputy Barnes is seated to my left. Deputy Phillips is standing to my left. And at the back of the courtroom, Deputy Hollister, Deputy Chambers, and Deputy Yancey. These are the 6 deputies that will be with you throughout the course of this trial. You can talk to them, but you can't talk to them about the case, and they cannot talk to you about the case also. All the deputies, raise your right hand and be sworn, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will take charge of this jury, that you will keep them separate and apart from all other persons, and not allow anyone to communicate with this jury, and as it concerns the case on trial, you would not communicate with the jury, allow the jury to communicate with you, and that you will deliver this jury safely into court, so help you God?
I will.
Thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, the deputy has taken an oath that they will in fact not allow you to talk to anyone, not to communicate with anyone, and they will bring you to court and again cannot talk to you about this case at all. You have in your possession jury notebooks that I told you to get yesterday. And included in those jury notebooks are some preliminary jury instructions. There are about 9 pages of preliminary instructions. I am required to present this to you and to read it to you. I wish I could tell you, just read it with you when you get back to the jury room and tell you to read it yourself, but I'm required to read this to you. I give you a copy of these instructions. You also have a copy of the final juror's instructions also. Those are your personal copies. You can write, highlight, underline anything on those instructions that you choose to do so. I'll give you a copy because I think most studies have indicated that if you have something to read, rather than have somebody to read at you, that you will probably retain more information. Do not feel obligated to read this information. I'm in fact obligated to read it to you. This is State of Tennessee versus Billy Turner, indictment number 1705881 in the Criminal Court for Shelby County Division 7, and these are your preliminary jury instructions. Before we begin the trial, I want to outline how the trial will be conducted and what functions the jurors, attorneys, and I will perform during the course of the proceedings. At the end of the testimony, I will give you more detailed instructions on how you are to reach a verdict. The state of Tennessee has charged the defendant with the offenses of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and criminal attempt first-degree murder. The document contained in the charge is referred to as an indictment. An indictment is a formal written accusation charging the defendant with a crime and is not evidence of anything. You shall not have any sympathy or prejudice for or against the defendant or for or against the state of Tennessee, or allow anything but the law and the evidence to have any influence upon your verdict. You must render your verdict with absolute fairness and impartiality as you think truth dictates and justice demands. The essential elements of first-degree murder in count 1 of the indictment are as follows. 1, that the defendant, or one for whom the defendant is criminally responsible, unlawfully killed Lorenzen Wright. And 2, that the defendant acted intentionally. A person acts intentionally when it is the person's conscious, objective, or desire to cause the death of the alleged victim. And 3, that the killing was premeditated. The essential elements of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in count 2 of the indictment are as follows. 1, that the defendant entered into an agreement with one or more people to commit the offense of first-degree murder. It is not necessary that the object of the agreement be attained. And 2, that each of the parties to the conspiracy had the intent to commit the offense of first-degree murder. And 3, that each party acting for the purpose of promoting or facilitating the commission of the offense of first-degree murder agreed that one or more of them would engage in conduct which constitutes the offense of first-degree murder. And 4, that one of the parties to the conspiracy committed an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. An overt act is an act done by one of the parties to carry out the intent of the conspiracy, and it must be a step toward the execution of the conspiracy. The essential elements of criminal attempt first-degree murder in count 3 of the indictment are as follows. 1, that the defendant or one for whom the defendant is criminally responsible intended to commit first-degree murder of Lorenzen Wright. And 2, that the defendant or one for whom the defendant is criminally responsible did some act intending to complete a course of action or cause a result that would constitute first-degree murder under the circumstances as the defendant believed them to be at the time, and his actions constituted a substantial step toward the commission of first-degree murder. The defendant's actions do not constitute a substantial step unless the defendant's entire course of action clearly shows his intent to commit first-degree murder. The defendant has pled not guilty to the indictment. He is presumed innocent and may not be found guilty by you unless, after hearing all of the evidence, attorneys' arguments, and instructions of law, the jurors seated in this trial unanimously find that the state of Tennessee has proven essential elements of the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt. The first step in the trial will be the attorney's opening statements. Statements of attorneys are not evidence. The only purpose of opening statements is to help you understand what the anticipated evidence will be. The state would outline the evidence it intends to present so that you have an idea what the state will attempt to prove during the trial. After the state's opening statement, the attorney for the defendant may make an opening statement if the attorney elects to do so. Next, the prosecution will present its evidence in the state's case in chief. The evidence in this case will most likely consist of testimony of witnesses, physical exhibits, and documents. The witnesses will testify by answering questions asked by the attorneys. After the state completes its case in chief, the defense will have an opportunity to submit evidence through witnesses and exhibits. A defendant is not required to offer any evidence or to testify. The state of Tennessee always has the burden to convince you that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If the defense does present proof, the state may then submit what is known as rebuttal proof. After the state's rebuttal, the defense may offer additional proof. After you have heard all of the evidence, I will instruct you about the rules of law that you are to use in returning your verdict. The state and the defense may then submit final arguments. As with opening statements, closing arguments are not evidence. In closing arguments, the attorneys will summarize their positions to assist you in understanding the evidence that was presented. The final part of the trial occurs when I instruct you about the procedures and rules of law that you are to use in returning and recording your verdict. After I read the concluding jury instructions, I will select and excuse randomly the alternate jurors. The final 12 jurors will retire to the jury room and start your deliberations to render a decision in this case. Your deliberations are secret, and you will not be required to explain your verdict to anyone. Having described in outline form the trial itself, let me explain the functions that the jury and I will perform during the trial. I will decide which rules of law apply in this case. My decisions will be reflected in responses to questions and objections that attorneys make during the trial and in my final jury instructions. The jury's job is to determine what the facts are from the evidence. You must then apply the law and the jury instructions to the facts, and from that process, you will arrive at a verdict. State of Tennessee has the burden of proving the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt, and this burden remains on the state throughout the entire case. The defendant is presumed to be innocent of the charges against him. Therefore, a defendant is not required to prove his innocence, to have his attorney make any statements or arguments, or to produce any evidence. Jurors must decide whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant has committed the crime charged in the indictment. You must base that decision only on the evidence in the case and my instructions about the law. An important part of your job will be making judgments about the testimony of witnesses who testify. You must decide whether you believe what each person says and the importance of that person's testimony. In making that decision, it might be helpful to consider the following questions. Did the person impress you as honest? Did the witness have any particular reason not to tell the truth? Did the witness have a personal interest in the outcome of the case? Did the witness seem to have a clear memory of the events testified about? Did the witness have the opportunity and ability to observe accurately the matters testified about? Did the witness appear to understand the questions clearly and answer them directly? Did the testimony of a witness differ from the testimony of other witnesses? These are some of the considerations that would help you determine the credibility of the testimony of each witness. In reaching a verdict, do not base any decisions on the fact that there were more witnesses on one side than on the other. Likewise, do not reach a conclusion on a particular point just because more witnesses testified for one side on that point. Your responsibility is to think about and evaluate the testimony of each witness you heard and decide the facts of this case. You might have heard the terms circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. These are the two basic types of evidence that exist in law. Direct evidence is direct proof of a fact, such as the testimony of an eyewitness. Circumstantial evidence is proof of facts from which you may infer or conclude that other facts exist. I will give you further instructions on these as well as other matters at the end of the case. You may consider both kinds of evidence, which are considered to be of equal value in the law. You will not receive a transcript of the proceedings at the end of the trial. Therefore, you must listen very carefully to the testimony. You will be allowed to take notes during the trial for your personal use during your deliberations. You are not required to take notes. Independent memory can be as precise as any written notes. You will be provided with notebooks should you decide to take notes. You shall not talk with any of the attorneys, witnesses, or the defendant involved in this case. Please do not talk with them about anything whatsoever. You might see them in the hallway, on an elevator, or at some other location. If you do, the best standing rule is not to say anything to avoid any inferences of impropriety or impartiality. During the trial, you will receive all of the evidence you may properly consider to decide the case. Therefore, you shall not attempt to conduct any private investigations or gather any independent information that you think might be helpful. Do not visit any locations mentioned in the testimony. In this age of electronic communications, you must not conduct any independent research about this case, the issues in this case, or the individuals involved in this case. You cannot use any tools to communicate electronically with anyone about the case, including your family and friends. You shall not communicate with anyone about this case through email, text messaging, on your cell phone, iPhone, or through any blog, or by way of any other social networking websites, including but not limited to Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You shall not consult dictionaries or reference materials or use any other electronic tools to obtain information about this case or to help you decide this case. Do not send or accept any messages from anyone about your jury service. You must decide this case based solely on the evidence and law presented here within this courtroom. You cannot allow any other persons to discuss the case with you or in your presence. If anyone attempts to do so, report the conversation to the court immediately without discussing the incident with any of the other jurors. Anyone who receives any other information about this case must notify the court immediately. Until you begin to deliberate, you shall not discuss the case with anyone, even your fellow jurors. After you retire to deliberate, you may begin discussing the case with the other jurors. It is important that you wait until all the evidence is received, all the arguments have been presented, you've heard all my instructions on the law before you begin your deliberations. Any discussions before you begin to deliberate would be premature and improper. You cannot discuss the case with anyone else until you returned a verdict and the case is concluded. I do not know whether there will be any media reports in the newspapers on television, on radio, or in social or electronic media about this trial. If there are, you're not permitted to read, watch, or listen to those reports. You must base your decision solely on the evidence you hear in the courtroom. At times during the trial, the attorney might object to a question that is asked by another attorney or an answer that a witness gives. This simply means that the attorney is requesting that I make a decision about a particular rule of law. Do not draw any conclusions from the fact that an objection was made or from my ruling on that objection. My rulings only relate to the legal questions that I must determine and must not influence your decisions. If I sustain an objection to a question, the witness would not be permitted to answer the question. Do not attempt to guess what the answer might have been had the witness been permitted to give it. Likewise, if I tell you not to consider a particular statement that was made, you must put that statement out of your mind, and you shall not refer to that statement in your later deliberations. If you have a question about the testimony of a witness, write it down and present it to a court deputy. Your question shall be anonymous. The deputy will then present the question to me. After discussions with the attorneys, if necessary, I will decide whether to ask the witness all or part of your question. For legal reasons, I might decide not to ask a witness a juror's question or ask only part of the question. Please do not be offended should this happen. The law is complex and contains many technical rules that the lawyers and I must follow. Please do not hold my decisions against any party in this case. During the trial, I might ask a question or two of a witness. If I do, that does not indicate that I have any opinions about the facts in the case or that I have any opinions about the credibility of any other witnesses. Finally, I might have to interrupt the proceedings in order to confer with the attorneys about the rules of law that should apply. In some cases, we might have bench conferences in the courtroom outside of your hearing. In other instances, I might have you retire to the jury room while we discuss matters out of your presence. We will try to avoid as many of these interruptions as possible. We'll attempt to resolve some of these issues in the morning before we get started. I request your patience because these interruptions are necessary points in the trial where we have to resolve legal issues. Ultimately, the conferences save time for all of us. After your deliberations, if you find the defendant guilty of any offense in the indictment, the court will set the punishment at a separate sentencing hearing. The jury will not be involved in setting any punishment in this case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this will complete my opening preliminary instructions to you. Before we proceed with the reading of the indictment, I told you Monday and I told you on March 4th, and I told you in writing that there will be media coverage. In fact, I think the preliminary instruction says I didn't know, but there will be media coverage in this case, which is why you have been sequestered. There are at least 4 cameras in this courtroom right now. One by Deputy Smith, one over at the edge of the jury box, one by Deputy Phillips, and one in the back of the courtroom. They are not going to put you on camera. They understand they cannot put jurors on camera, so ignore the cameras, don't focus on them, don't pay any attention to them. They could be a distraction, but don't worry about those cameras. They're here to cover the trial. They can cover witnesses. They can cover what judges and what lawyers say, but they cannot report, cannot cover, cannot put jurors on TV at any point. So please just ignore the cameras and make sure you stay focused on the trial and on witnesses, and just ignore those cameras. Any questions? Mr. Hagerman and or Mr. Schofield. Mr. Hagerman. Deputy Smith. Class the trial jacket. Mr. Hagerman, please, sir. Mr. Hagerman, you may proceed with the reading of the presentment of the indictment, sir.
This is indictment 17-05881 in State of Tennessee versus Cheryl Wright and Billy Turner. It's an indictment charging them with murder in the first degree, with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, and with criminal intent to commit murder in the first degree. It is signed by the foreperson of the grand jury. And I'll begin with count 1 of the indictment. State of Tennessee Criminal Court of Shelby County, November term 2017, count 1. The grand jurors of the State of Tennessee duly selected, impaneled, sworn, and charged to inquire for the body of the County of Shelby, Tennessee, upon their oath, present that Billy Turner and Shara Wright, between July 17th, 2010 and July 20th of 2010 in Shelby County, Tennessee, and before the finding of this indictment, did unlawfully, intentionally, and with premeditation kill Lorenzen Wright in violation of Tennessee Code Annotated 3913-202 against the peace and dignity of the State of Tennessee, signed by the District Attorney General for the 30th Judicial District. State of Tennessee Criminal Court of Shelby County, November term 2017, count 2. The grand jurors of the State of Tennessee, duly selected, impaneled, sworn, and charged to inquire for the body of the County of Shelby, Tennessee, upon their oath, present that Billy Turner and Shara Wright, between April the 1st of 2010 and July the 30th of 2010, in Shelby County, Tennessee, and before the finding of this indictment, did unlawfully and intentionally agree, conspire, and act to kill Lorenzen Wright with premeditation, and that the said Billy Turner and Shara Wright did, in furtherance of the conspiracy, travel to the area of Callis Cutoff and Hacks Cross to kill Lorenzen Wright in violation of Tennessee Code Annotated 3912-103 and 3913-202 against the peace and dignity of the State of Tennessee, again signed by the District Attorney General for the 30th Judicial District. State of Tennessee Criminal Court of Shelby County, November term 2017, count 3. The grand jurors of the State of Tennessee, duly selected, impaneled, sworn, and charged to inquire for the body of the County of Shelby, Tennessee, upon their oath, present that Billy Turner and Shara Wright, between April the 1st of 2010 and July the 17th of 2010, and before the finding of this indictment, did unlawfully attempt to commit the offense of first-degree murder as defined in Tennessee Code Annotated 3913-202, in that they did unlawfully and intentionally and with premeditation attempt to kill Lorenzen Wright. The said Billy Turner and said Shara Wright did meet and agree to kill Lorenzen Wright, and did take substantial steps toward the completion of this crime by acquiring firearms to commit the act, recruiting an unindicted co-conspirator to help, and, on the part of said Billy Turner, traveling to and entering Lorenzen Wright's home outside of Atlanta, Georgia, to commit said criminal offense. While this offense was committed in part in other jurisdictions, it began in Shelby County, Tennessee, all in violation of Tennessee Code Annotated 3912-101 against the peace and dignity of the State of Tennessee, again signed by the District Attorney General for the 30th Judicial District. Again, it's indictment for murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, criminal attempt murder in the first degree, a true bill returned and signed by the foreperson of the grand jury on December the 12th of 2017.
Ms. Hagerman. Ms. Perry and Ms. Thomas, how does Mr. Billy Turner plead to this indictment?
Your Honor, Billy Turner pleads absolutely not guilty.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, issue has been formally joined in this case. Mr. Perry, on behalf of Mr. Turner, has entered a not guilty plea to all 3 counts of the indictment. Mr. Hagerman, you may proceed with an opening statement.
What does it take to kill a man? What does it take to kill a man? What does it take to kill a son? To kill a father of 6 children? To kill a brother? To kill a friend? To kill a homegrown hero, high school basketball star, turned college All-American, turned NBA player, and no matter where he went to play, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Cleveland, he always came back here. Every off season, every chance he got. What does it take to kill a father, son, a man who had Memphis running through his veins? What does it take to kill Lorenzen Wright? Before we answer that, let's hear what it sounds like to kill a man. Let's hear what it sounds like to kill Lorenzen Wright. July 18th, turning into July 19th. It's just after midnight. It's actually 12:12 a.m. 12 minutes after. The call is to Germantown 911. You'll hear two male voices. The first male voice is the caller, Lorenzen Wright. The second male voice is the killer. And then you'll hear gunshot after gunshot after gunshot.
Georgetown 911, where's your emergency? Hello? 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 Someone had nothing but gunshots.
That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like to kill a man. That's what it sounds like to kill Lorenzen Wright. In a field separated by a barbed wire fence, not too high, off a little cut-through road near Hacks Cross, Callus Cutoff. There's trees, 2010, no street lights, a little road that nobody uses, next to a field separated by a little barbed wire fence. That's what it sounded like to kill him there in the middle of the night. But what did it take? But what did it take to kill him? I'll tell you what it didn't take first. It didn't take courage. It didn't take strength. It didn't take bravery. It didn't take anything good. Instead, it took two things. The first was a plan. The first thing it took was a plan. First, Lorenzen had to be lured to Memphis. He was living in Atlanta. And then he had to be lured in the middle of the night to a little road where he had no business being, next to the field, where this could happen with no witnesses. And the hope that the people that did it could get away. That's the first thing it took. A plan to get him there, to get him alone, to get him vulnerable, and to do this without witnesses and with the hope to get away. But the second thing it took was evil. Evil in the heart. It took an evil heart to do this. And I'm not talking about Billy Turner's heart. I'm not talking about him. It took a particularly evil heart. One that was filled with jealousy, with desperation, with hurt, with greed, and literally 2 million reasons to want him dead. I'm talking about Sheriff Wright, Lorenzen's ex-wife. An evil heart, greed. But like yesterday, when we planned our bank robbery, Sheriff Wright's not a professional killer. This is not something she does. She doesn't have a phone directory of hitmen. No. She had to reach out to people that she trusted or that were indebted to her, or that, what did we talk about yesterday? Sketchy uncle, maybe with some criminal past. She had to reach out to people like that to get this thing planned, done, and covered up. 2 people in particular. And the first, who I am talking about now, is Billy Turner. Billy Turner was Sheriff Wright's friend. Billy Turner was Sheriff Wright's yard man. Billy Turner was Sheriff Wright's romantic, secret interest. Billy Turner was somebody that Sheriff Wright could trust, manipulate, and use. Evil heart. There's another person there too. Jimmy Martin, also known as J. Martin. Sheriff's cousin. You want to call him the sketchy cousin? We can call him the sketchy cousin. J. Martin, who, after he got out of the Navy, went back to live in Batesville. Batesville's an hour or so from here, and got in trouble. At the time, accused and indicted for a domestic murder, for killing his girlfriend. Sketchy criminal past. Check that box. But more sketchy criminal past who's indebted to Sheriff because Sheriff made his bond. Sheriff was paying for his attorney, for Jimmy Martin's attorney, while he went through the court case about killing his girlfriend. That's who Sheriff Wright reached out to. That's who she manipulated, and that's who she used. That was her. We had a team of bank robbers. That was her team of co-conspirators and killers. Wasn't a great team. Wasn't a great team, but it was her team. Billy Martin, Billy Turner, Jimmy Martin, and Sheriff Wright. So, back to what we heard. 12:12 a.m., July 18th turning into July 19th. 911 call. 2 male voices. Gunshot after gunshot to the Germantown 911 center. Okay. So what does Germantown do? What could Germantown have done? Research the information, get whatever phone stuff they had to get, and figure out where that call was coming from, right? Isn't that what happens when you call 911, something like that happens? Gunshots, end of phone call. Let's find out where this phone call was coming from. And if they had, they would have been on that little road, Callus Cutoff, within hours. They would have been there within hours of that shooting. And what they would have found, before they found Lorenzen's body in the field, what they would have found was a barbed wire fence that had blood on it from one of the killers trying to hop through it when they chased Lorenzen. They would have found that, and they could have done DNA. What they would have found is another gun. Not even the murder weapon, but another gun that had been fired on that little street during this murder. They would have found it tossed into some bushes down the street. When Sheriff Wright got excited and scared and tossed it, they would have found that too. When they went over the fence, they would have found Lorenzen Wright dead, because he was shots to the head. They would have found casings, and they would have found bullets. They would have found him freshly dead. They would have been at Shara's house soon after that, because the last place Lorenzen Wright was before he went to Callus Cutoff was Shara Wright's house with her. The police would have been at Shara Wright's house within hours of this 911 call, and they would have found her scrambling right after having done this thing. They would have seen the person that she texted right before they did this, Billy Turner. They would have found him that night, that morning too. They would have found the murder weapon, a 9mm that was responsible for putting the bullets in Lorenzen after he ran into the field. They would have found all those things within hours of this crime. It wouldn't have taken much work after that to find Jimmy Martin, the third person who was part of this conspiracy. He wasn't there when the murder was done. He was supposed to be, but he wasn't. But they would have found him too. They would have found all three: Shara, Billy, Jimmy, murder weapon, phones, evidence, and the case would be over. You want me to tell you what Germantown did with that 911 call? Do you want me to tell you what they did with it? With what you heard? Nothing. Nothing. They didn't even look to see who it was from. They didn't even look to see where it was from. They didn't even tell other jurisdictions, hey, gunshots, end of call. This sounded really bad. They did nothing. Nothing. And so Lorenzen Wright's body sat in the field next to Callus Cutoff for days. One day became 2 days. 2 days became 3 days. His mother after 3 days had to come and report him missing. Not Sheriff Wright, not the last person he was with. But his mother had to come forward and report him missing. 3 days became 4, became 5, became 6, became 7, became 8 days. What did we say about the first 48? That's an important time period. We're 8 days past. 8 days past when the Collierville Police Department, not Germantown, when the Collierville Police Department gets phone records and realizes the last number, the last person that Lorenzen Wright ever spoke to was at 12:12 on July 19th, and it was Germantown 911. Oh, my goodness. In those 9 days, because they did their homework after that. Once they found out that was the number that he had called 911, you figure out where the phone was. You triangulate the location. You go out there, and what do you know? You find him. And we'll talk about that. But in those 9 days before they found him, that was 9 days for these conspirators, Shara, Billy, and Jimmy, to cover up. And you'll be read the law at the end. A cover-up is part of a conspiracy. A cover-up is a part of a conspiracy. 9 days to cover up this murder. To tell stories, to get stories straight, to go to Callous Cutoff and find the gun that you threw in the bushes, to go to Callous Cutoff and cut down the barbed wire fence that has your blood on it, to take the murder weapon away from Memphis, off the side of a highway 30 miles from Memphis, down a little turnoff that leads to a landfill and has a little lake to the right, and put the murder weapon at the bottom of a lake where nobody in this world would ever find it. They had 9 days to do all those things. And that's how the murder of a Memphis hero, the father of a son, brother, becomes Memphis's most publicized mystery cold case. If only Germantown had done what they should have done, this would have been over by July 25th, 2010. Jimmy, Billy, and Shara would have been charged then. But instead, this became one of the longest and most publicized cold cases in Memphis history. Years. 1 year became 2, became 3, became 6. Now, during those years, the truth, bits of the truth, actually peek out. You can hide stuff, but it's hard to hide stuff completely. A conspiracy. Hard to hide a conspiracy and a murder like this completely. So through those 6 years, 2010 to 2016, bits of the truth do come popping out. Investigators do get phone records from Shara, from Billy, and from Jimmy. They see suspicious text, suspicious conversations, things that don't make sense. They talked to witnesses. We've talked to Sharon. Things that don't make sense. And then, a few years into the 6 years, they talked to Jim. What did we say yesterday? If you're picking a co-conspirator, you better hope that co-conspirator doesn't tell it. Well, in 2012, during the 6 years, 2012, Jimmy told it. Jimmy, who is in jail then, having been convicted for the murder that we were talking about of the girlfriend, where Shara had hired his attorney and bonded him out. Jimmy had been convicted, and afterwards he told him that this was a conspiracy to kill Lorenzen, that it was me, that it was Billy, that it was Shara. He gave him details on how it happened. While he wasn't there, he helped the planning beforehand, and he helped the cover up afterwards. He even told him where something was. In 2012, he even told him where something was. What'd they do with that information in 2012? Better than Germantown, at least they did something. They got a few volunteer divers together. They went to a little lake. It's a turn off the highway, about 30 miles from here on the way to the town. Right after it had rained and the visibility of the water was almost zero, a couple volunteer divers didn't find it. And that's how 2012 turns into 2016. 2016, a new group of investigators with a focus. Reinvestigate Memphis's most publicized cold case, something that's gone unsolved for 6 years. Reinvestigate it. And this time, not with volunteer divers, not after a rainy day, but with the FBI dive team, professionals who do this for a living. Let's go out to the same lake, next to the same landfill off that highway, and let's search it for real. Let's see if Jimmy's telling the truth, finally, or not. Let's decide it. One day to set up the grid pattern they're going to use to search, scout the lake. Second day, the FBI divers go into the lake. You'll see pictures of it. There's even a video of it. Within minutes, where Jimmy had said it was, where he had estimated it was, this thing was never supposed to be found. This is the gun that killed Lorenzen Wright. Right where Jimmy said it was in 2012. At first, when you preserve it, you find something that's been in water, you put it in a bucket with the same water that it's in. And that's what the FBI and the investigators did. Then you drive it ASAP to the crime lab, and you compare it to the casings and to the bullets that they found in Lorenzen Wright. You'll hear from the TBI. This is the murder weapon that killed Lorenzen Wright, that was thrown at the bottom of a lake, and nobody in this world was ever supposed to see this again. But Jimmy led him straight to it. step one of the investigation. Truth test for Jimmy. Right where he said it was. For one gun in this world. Pick a co-conspirator, you better hope the co-conspirator doesn't just tell it. Other witnesses. They find other witnesses. They find a nanny, Claudia. It's a nanny for Lorenzen and for Sharon, who was present. Jimmy had told them in 2012 there was a woman there at least one of the times that we were planning this murder that I didn't know. We were in Shara's house. There was a woman there I didn't know who heard what we were saying, and she was there. She was younger. She was pregnant. He told him that in 2012. He told him that in 2012. Well, in 2016, they found out who that person was. Claudia Robinson, nanny to the kids. They found Claudia. What does Claudia say? Yeah. Yeah. I'm ashamed of it. I guess I'm part of it. But I was there. When Shara Wright said she wanted Lorenzen Wright dead, and she told Jimmy and Billy, the yard man, to do it. Literally, they were all in the kitchen together. They find other witnesses too. They'll find Billy's car that Jimmy talked about in 2012. They'll find other incriminating evidence. You'll see it during the trial. But they also hatched a little plan. They did an investigation after they found this gun, but they kept it secret. They didn't tell anybody they found this gun yet. They wanted to keep it secret for a while because they had a plan. When we release it to the media, we want to have Shara and we want to have Billy under surveillance. We want to have them under surveillance because we want to see what happens. We want to see what happens. They would have put Jimmy under surveillance too, but Jimmy was in prison. Still in prison for the murder of his girlfriend. When we release this to the media, we want to put Billy and we want to put Shara under surveillance. Released to the media. What do we expect? Say you don't know about this whole conspiracy to commit murder. Say you don't know about any of it. What do you expect from Shara, grieving widow of Lorenzen, mother of his children? What would you expect? For 6 years, the mysterious death of your husband is now close to being solved because we found the murder weapon. Wouldn't you expect? Thank you so much. This is great. This is great because there's somebody out there that killed my husband and we're getting closer to catching him. That's what you'd expect. That's what you'd expect. But instead, under surveillance, she is distraught, despondent, suicidal, and at the time living in California, needs to come back to Memphis ASAP. The first plane I can get, telling hardly anybody, unplanned, nearly suicidal. She needs to get back to Memphis ASAP. ASAP. And so she does. And when she gets here, she needs to make contact with somebody. But not on her own phone. Years ago, she'd been wiretapped. Police listening to your phone. Not on her own phone. I need to use somebody else's phone to get in contact with the person I need to talk to. And I don't need to talk to this person on the phone. I need to see this person in person. And I not only need to see this person in person, I need to have a conversation away from anybody else. Walking up and down the street, looking, trying to make sure nobody's watching. I need to do this ASAP. And guess who that person is? Billy Turner. And guess where the police were? In a van on the street, watching it happen. As the two of them, once the gun's found, have to meet, have to talk immediately. She probably need to talk to Jimmy too, but he's still in jail, in prison. You'll also hear when Billy's arrested. Sometime, somebody was talking about it yesterday, talking about their kids or something and confronting them and credibility. Sometimes lies can tell you more than the truth. You'll hear the things that Billy lied about when the police talked to him. You'll hear the things that he had absolutely no answer for. And at the end of this, took a plan, took a conspiracy, took an evil heart to start it and to see it through. But you'll see that Sheriff, that Jimmy, and that Billy are responsible for the conspiracy to kill Lorenzen Wright and for the first-degree murder of Lorenzen Wright.
Ms. Hagerman? Ms. Perry and Ms. Perry, you may proceed with the opening statement. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I'm glad that Mr. Hagerman started with the question, what does it take? What does it take to kill a pillar of this community? What does it take to take a person's life on a dark road? I don't know if anybody here has ever been to Callus Cutoff, but you can barely get back then 2 cars down that road. So at midnight, during the midnight hour, what would it take to kill a 7-foot basketball star? What would it take to kill a person who had done nothing but bring joy to his family and his friends? They've traveled the world, they've seen great things, they've had experiences that these people lived through this man. What would it take to strike him down if you're his wife? What would it take to try to get him to Memphis if you're his wife at one point? More importantly, at this point, you're not married, but you're the mother of his children. What would it take to do that? Would it take a man who they describe as a yard man, but a man who's got his own business? He doesn't cut just Cheryl Wright's yard. Does it take a man who is her secret love interest that nobody describes as her secret love interest, except for the man that y'all are gonna have to put this case on in a few days. It's Jimmy Martin. Edna's J. Martin, I think he's called in older cousin Shara's phone book. Edna's J. Doesn't even have his own name or identity to go by. But what does it take to do that? What does it take, as Mr. Hagerman said, to lack the courage that it takes to come and stand in front of a man to man, and say, I'm gonna take your life, but instead to strike you down while you're waiting, while you're supposed to be out if you're the person's ex-wife, and you got him in the car and say, hey, I'm gonna try to call a yard man and see, because he wants to give you some cards on the side of a road. What does it take to do that? What does it take to ask this yard man, who has his own place to live, who has his own car, who has his own motorcycle, who has his own equipment truck, what does it take to ask that person if you can have his car? So that little Jimmy, Edna's J, the trickster, as he goes by in his fledgling rap career, what does it take to get him to give you his car? What does it take to start your investigation at the point of saying, well, I'm going to do an outline from July 17, 2010 into July 23rd, 2010, as opposed to where it's obvious that Jay, little Jimmy, and Shara are talking about going to Atlanta days earlier. It takes a punk's heart that's sitting in prison right now for taking a firearm and shooting his wife or his fiance that he lives with to death. It takes that type of a punk to sit up and come up with a story, and as you're talking to the detectives, to say, they told me this. Who told you this? Billy? What did Billy tell you? He told me that he and Shara put together a plot to drive his car to a road so that he could pull over on the side of the road, and so that Lorenzen can pull over inside the van with Shara, and that Shara would take the gun, and that she would act like she was having an argument with Billy, and then Billy could jump out and shoot him. It would take a person who could come up with that as they're talking to an officer 23 days after they're found guilty of murder in this building, 5 months before they're sentenced to some 18-year sentence for killing his girlfriend. That's what it takes. It takes the type of person who changes facts like a person changes underwear, excuse me. It takes that type of person, a person who says, you know what? I had the murder car that night. That's what it's gonna take. And then it's gonna take, after he figures out that some people probably have talked to detectives, to change that. I wasn't in the car that was used. I didn't have Billy's car that night. But y'all gotta listen to this. Y'all gonna have to listen to this 10 days out of your life. Listen to it and hear it and digest it. It takes a person that not only can take those facts and spin them. I didn't have the murder weapon that night. I didn't find it myself. Or maybe I did. Well, no, I didn't. It takes a person that can weave and go back and forward and back and forward. I don't even know how to cross-examine this man when he comes in here, but I guarantee one thing, the people on this jury have ears. You have the ability to listen and discern, and I don't think it's going to be too hard to quickly understand that the state of Tennessee made a big old mistake. Now, a few minutes ago, Mr. Hagerman pointed out the mistake that Collierville police made. They made a hell of a mistake. They didn't report it. They didn't report this stuff. They didn't call anybody. Well, guess what the state of Tennessee did? That when this guy says, hey, you know what? I can figure out the murder for you before my sentencing. All right? I can figure out that murder for you. Guess what they do? They give him a permanent get out of jail free card. Sign this. They signed a contract. Like you go in and buy a car, they signed a contract. No matter what you say, if it changes, if it weaves, if it bobs, there's nothing that we're going to do to you. So this unindicted co-conspirator is a farce. It's a lie. It's nothing. It's something that, as the judge said, a lady from the office reads what we said we think happens, and it goes from there. So you do have calls from Billy, because Billy got his car given to Shara. Shara gives it to Jimmy. Now, I don't think that'll ever be disputed, because even in all the other stuff that he says, he always, I got the car from Shara. Now, you'll hear different facts about what was supposed to have happened on this day. You'll hear facts that there was some meeting, and that when they got to the kitchen during that meeting, there were 3 guns. He changes the type of guns that were supposed to be there. He says that there was the pregnant nanny, who we know is Claudia. You'll see her later today. Says that Shara is there. You'll also hear, I hope, if it's truthful, Claudia say, Shara's always talking about Lorenzen's gonna kill her. That ain't nothing odd. It ain't nothing odd if somebody says, hey, somebody's gonna kill me, and my answer to it is, what am I supposed to do? And it definitely ain't odd for Billy to be there, because once a week, whether or not Shara can pay, or if she fails to pay, the conversation is always, if you ask them what are the text messages, etc., it's about business with Billy. There ain't no conversation about, I love you. Will you send me a personal picture? Will you send me a picture of your body part? Will you do this, that, or the other? Not from Billy to Shara, but it is from a few other people to Shara. The evidence is going to show, clear as can be, Billy had a well-established life. Billy was living that life in Collierville during that time, in the Memphis area, working, and he was going about life. Also shows he's dealing with church folks. And it was also showed that, I know it's around the perimeters. Let me get it out there. Billy had a history. When Billy was 20, he went to jail. He did his 1.5 years in jail. He got out and he lived his life straight as an arrow. Billy was a man. He dated women. He took care of his responsibilities. And he had fun. But he went to church. He went to church during the week. And as you're going to hear from Claudia, he was so slow, her word, that all I knew about Billy, I thought he was slow. I thought he was slow because he stayed that green and straight and narrow. Now, I was wondering yesterday why you heard all of this scenario about a bank robbery and a this and a that, and Paul, as cool as Paul is, kind of got over here about, what about this? What about, you got them, if it's everybody in this circle, they're guilty. Yada, yada, yada. Well, what about if he didn't do nothing? If he's on them, he's guilty. Judge said, I'll instruct you on the law. And you'll get the law at the end of the case. After you measure what comes out of that chair and is told to you, look at the eye contact, look at the body language, look at how the witness tells what they're going to tell. So yeah, you'll see text messages at certain points and it will become clear, and particularly if Jimmy testifies like I think he's going to testify, not necessarily truthfully, but it's the fact that we have his recordings that I know he's going to talk about, you got to get folks' hands dirty some. Now, he doesn't put himself in the person who's getting his hands dirty. He puts himself as the person that, want to get information to blackmail Shara. That's what you're going to hear from him. I'm getting information to blackmail Shara. So let me be clear. This is what you're going to have to swallow in order to do as Paul, as he whispers, this, to find him guilty. This is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to listen to what a person who a few days after he was convicted of killing his girlfriend goes in and tells detectives that I can solve this. And then you're going to also have to listen to the fact that as he's telling his story, they buy it hook, line, and sinker, and they write him a contract, and they do all of this stuff before they pull Facebook records between Shara and Jimmy. Let me be clear on this, because I don't want it to come out that I'm confusing anybody or anything. Before you get concentrated Facebook messages between Shara and Jimmy, and you see those messages, and you can take a third grader and figure what they're talking about, and guess whose name ain't no damn where near it? Billy. Billy's got his own life that he's living. Billy would loan his car to any of y'all if somebody that he knew vouched for you. He don't know nothing about little Jimmy other than Jimmy comes to the house one day while he's over there and Shara's talking about Jimmy needs a car. He doesn't have a car, but he has these DJ gigs. And you'll see Billy demanding his car back because it took a little long. That's all. But more importantly, you'll hear the people that will come in and talk about what Billy was doing to a person that evening. What he was doing, when I say to a person, I mean 3 or 4 witnesses that will tell you that on the evening of July 18th, 2010, Billy was here. Billy was doing XYZ. Billy did this during the evening. You'll see pictures of Billy during that evening. It's God's grace. Because ain't nobody sitting up trying to plan an alibi because he ain't have nothing to alibi. But you'll see where he is during the evening leading into the midnight hour where the punk that killed his girlfriend is supposed to be playing these phone games. Oh, I wasn't up there, I was in Batesville. Well, who's this number, this 662-561-3048 that you can't explain? I don't know. You called it all day. I don't know. Tell me what this message is about. Well, no, I take that back. They never did get around to asking them about the Facebook stuff, and all of the things that I read and that I have listened to, they never ask about that. They never ask him about what is the context to this. Now, what they did ask him about, and you'll get a chance to listen to, what's the context with this message? Where you're obviously supposed to be meeting her somewhere. But guess what? They don't have any of those type of messages with Billy and Shara. That's Jimmy and Shara. And guess what his answers to those are? Unless he's changed his mind. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what that is. You don't know where you're supposed to be meeting her, and you don't know where this time is. I don't know. So that's what you're going to have to jump over, these hurdles consistently in order to find Billy Ray Turner guilty. Now, while you're thinking about that, think about this, that their lead witness, who during this time, mind you, when he came in doing his telling and solving problems, that's after he's convicted. That's after Shara has spent $20,000 or $30,000 on him. That's after all of that. The only person who lays out a motive about any of this is little Jimmy, Edna's Jay. Because Claudia's gonna come in and you'll hear what Jay said that she was doing, and it was, I'm sorry, and yeah. She ain't testifying like that. Claudia is gonna be clear. I went over there today, I heard something said, but guess what? You also will have the opportunity to hear Claudia and Shara talking both before she goes downtown and after she goes downtown. You'll hear that conversation, and then you say, is she telling the police what they want to hear or not? You get the chance to hear. What's interesting is that Billy talked for a second, and they're gonna, I'm sure, have somebody who's a detective say, we asked him this, he ain't answered, and then he got tired and called. Well, guess what? All right, lawyer, I think, and I asked for, can I have the video of that? Oh, we ain't do that. 48 hours, he's talked about it, not me, 48 hours, that's the show. 48 hours, they record everything. They record you when you walk in, you're coughing, they see what type of gum you got, the cool lady with the hair and the nails, she asks you her questions and all of that stuff, and they solve it within that hour. Not a audio recording of Billy, not a video recording of Billy, and not anything handwritten by Billy. But I'm pretty confident that they'll have a detective to try to say, Well, he told me this. I'm sure that there's going to be some information about how they were supposed to have found this weapon and when that's going to come to you. And I'm sure that they're going to eventually try to say, well, there was a metal detector involved. Let's see if they bring the person whose metal detector it is, because I know what her testimony is. Now, that's not Edna's Jay, that's in fact Jay's Edna. Jay's Edna would be the aunt of Shara. You'll see who made the suggestion to Shara to contact Auntie Edna. You'll also have to answer these questions. Shara is 12 years older than Jay. Why would she be going to Batesville 5 and 6 times to get Jay if he wasn't really involved in this? He was just an observer trying to get information so he could blackmail Shara. That's the first question. Second question, why would anybody who supposedly committed a murder then go to Batesville to explain to Edna's Jay and brag that I committed this murder? What kind of sense does that make? Third question, why in the hell would anybody that's not stupid go to Batesville to pick up a man with the sole purpose of driving him from Collierville, that's 70 miles, to Walnut, Mississippi, that's 50 miles, and then back past Collierville, back to Batesville, and then back home, so that you can watch me throw a gun away? Third question. I shouldn't have started numbering because I can't keep up, so bear with me for a second. Next question. Why would anybody ever say in one recording that they only knew about this throwing the gun away and where it was, etc., that they can explain with pinpoint, precise accuracy, and they can forget everything else? Why would they describe objects clearly? And then the next time they talk, that's in 2012 and 2017, no, I wasn't in a car. I didn't see clippers that I described the color, the size that were used supposedly to cut down this barbed wire. I didn't see that then. But I want you all to hone in on this, please. Why would that person in 2017 describe, after having bragged and all this other stuff about throwing a gun away, finally say, I threw a gun away? Why would that person do that? I threw a gun away. Now, it wasn't the gun that I described back in 2012. It wasn't the gun that was used in this. It was 9mm. I ain't throw that one away, because that's what puts Billy in it. Because Billy's supposed to be, as Claudia said, he's slow. He's supposed to be so slow that he drives from Collierville to Batesville to Walnut, Mississippi, and back to Batesville. Buy that. If this story sells, I got a nice bridge that's shaped like an M. Give me $50, it's yours. If this story sells. But you know who it sold to? It sold to the people who were having the 15 people. Good afternoon, Memphis. We solved this. We solved it. But in any of that stuff, did you ever hear about Edna's J and this contract that no matter what, we can't go after you? No matter what you say, how many times you change these facts, we can't go after you. Did you hear about Billy during that time? The fact that he wasn't, the fact that he's first in, first out, last out at church, that he opens it, closes it, cuts the heat on, cuts the lights on, that's what he does. That when people that are church members say, hey, this person's supposed to close down, that Billy is the person that you tell to do it. Not only there, but at your own home. That he's the last one to leave the engagement, because I want him to make sure that he puts the stuff up, the tables and the cake and all of this other stuff. Did they tell you that? Nah, because you know what? I don't care about the court of public opinion. I care about the court of you 12. That's it. It's 15 now, but it's gonna be dwindled down to 12. I ask that you listen and that you weigh the evidence and that you give it the seriousness that it deserves. But at the end of the day, it becomes clear that they can't answer those questions answer those questions I just asked. That if they have somebody who says that Billy said something, let them do it just like everybody else. Let them play it for you in here. Let them show you where it's signed in here. Not a bunch of excuses and reasons. Well, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you say that? Ask them to show it to you just like you would any other witness. I don't care if the person has a detective badge on. Ask them to show it to you just like anybody in here would want. Also, listen to those distances because they become very important. And listen to Jimmy. And listen to how he is. Before I sit down, the desperation in here is so clear that I really don't know what to expect. I know that they're gonna probably bring somebody who says, Billy, who's sitting over in the jail watching this, waiting on this day to get before y'all, said, man, Sheriff Glenn, I shot that nigga for her. I expect that to be said. But before you make your decision up on that, wait till you hear the rebuttal side of that. That's all I ask. I also ask that if somebody comes in here that doesn't have any connections or anything that's entrenched or rooted, and that he's all of a sudden marched in, remember the fact that who has a lot of power, a lot of investigatory power, can make a lot of things move, shake, and go in the way that you want, and still weigh the evidence. In this case, it is a thinking man and a thinking lady's case. And I think that you all are the people that can think and see through it, because you can't, there's no way to sit up and say something bad about Lorenzen Wright. He's a great guy. This case, with all due respect to his family and his friends and his fraternity brothers and his close loved ones, this case ain't about him. This case is about Billy Ray Turner. And Billy Ray Turner has a name that once he got out of jail, he dedicated himself to keeping in the right way. And he helped some punk out through his niece or cousin or whatever she is to him, and he's here for it. But guess what? He put his hands in your hands. And I ask that you give that honor, the honor that you have to serve on this jury, the paramount respect that it deserves, and wait until you hear everything to make up your decisions. And I think that here, I'm gonna go through a chart at the end of this about guilt. It's nowhere near beyond a reasonable doubt through the witnesses that they have. But here is one of these rare ring the bell situations where it becomes clear that Billy Ray Turner is innocent and this fiance killer is 100% guilty. But guess what? Y'all ain't gonna get to determine that, and neither will any other Shelby County jury. Thank y'all.
Jeff Smith. 12:45. Council approach, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm told your lunch will be here at about 12:45. Before the state calls its first witness, does anyone need a break at this time? And if you do, don't hesitate to let me know. You got one taker. Remember, course instruction, cannot discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You've heard opening statements, and what I told you is opening statements is not evidence. We'll resume in a few minutes, and we'll take one witness, and then we'll take a lunch break. You can follow Deputy Smith, please. Watch the step coming down there. Phillips. Call the court into recess, please, sir.
We'll stand to recess.